So you should look at that, and you may have a very imperfect justice system and democracy. And not necessarily because of politicization from above, but because of corporatization of this, of the prosecutors and judges. To some extent, we have this problem in Poland. And again, this is another example of a weakness which requires civil action, pressure, to change the rules of the game in prosecutors and the judges. I'm not saying this is massive, but frequent enough to, for example, you've been having too frequent cases when entrepreneurs have been prosecuted by the prosecutors without much evidence. Probably they did not like capitalism. So they started to prosecute. Now let me focus on the second issue, economic freedom. Now, democracy means political competition and elections, and democracy cannot exist without these liberties. These are basic, and well defended, of course. But these freedoms which should be defended are used and are going to be used by the enemies of economic freedom. Lobbyists, aggressive trade unions, etc. And various groups, collectivist groups, and solution, of course, is not to prohibit them to use it. Then the freedom would be shrunk too much. The solution is to mobilize more by using these freedoms. To create an effective counterbalance within the civil society. And I would say that collectivist groups which are using civil freedom exist in every country and are going to exist. And if they prevail, you have views. Economic catastrophe or stagnation, as in Italy, for the last 20 years almost, etc. And they say, are they going to exist? They exist, and the only solution is to organize better on the other side. Now, this is just an explanation that what direction the political system takes with respect to economy depends on the balance. Like in physics, you have opposite forces. Yes. Now, the first group is very important within civil society, mutual help. And this is not only philanthropy, even though philanthropy should not be denigrated. Mutual help means friendly societies like in Britain. 7 billion people did belong to this. What happened with mutual help is being crowded out by expansion of the welfare state. And then you have two kinds of pressures on the political system. Say, statist groups, they include groups which not always confess they want to expand the state. Some of them want to shrink the state, but the effect is like that. I'm going to discuss that. And the opposing groups, let's call it liberal groups. Now, economic freedom sometimes considered to be a very prosaic, not important, something to be left to economists. It's fundamentally important. It's a freedom of practical action. It's a freedom to earn your money in various ways, which of course includes 3 overlapping variables. Right to work. I do not mean only elimination of slavery, which has happened, but in the 19th century there were many restrictions of formally free labor. State regulations were regulating formally free labor, meaning people who were not slaves. This was abolished, so a freedom right to work originated in the 19th century, but then you have excessive regulation on the other side, which was the social, under the heading of the social right to work, meaning regulations on the employers. So the pendulums have swung on the other side. Of course, private entrepreneurship, which means private ownership, which overlaps with freedom of contract, because you cannot be a free owner if your contracting activities very heavily restricted or regulated. So this is essence, and you see, to prohibit economic context is almost like prohibit speech. This is a kind of interaction. But it's so popular to regulate, to prohibit, to regulate, and restrict economic. Now I come to something which I call a paradox, as expressed in the title of my talk. First, one can prove empirically that economic freedom is the most fundamental one for something which is basic for millions of people, end of poverty, and improvement of the living standard. The second point is that without capitalism, which is based on private ownership, there is not possible to have democracy. Not democratic socialism is oxymoron. It's impossible. But I know many intellectuals in the West especially which hate capitalism and love democracy. So I always urge them to exert, to show a substitute love, so to say, vis-a-vis capitalism, without which there is no democracy. Coming to economic, how do we know that economic freedom is so fundamental for elimination of poverty and the improvement in human lives, materially? Lots of research. We know that the more extreme is the restriction of economic freedom, the worse for the longer term economic loss. The most extreme was socialism based on Marx, which by definition banned private ownership. In other words, they did a crime. And there's a lot of comparative research which shows there was no good socialism. It was extremely repressive, and it led to stagnation and a loss of time. The most extreme examples, of course, is the comparison of North and South Korea. In the early 60s, they were equally poor. In 2003, North Korea had 7% of South Korean per capita income. You know that North Korea is an example, is an extreme example of modern Stalinism, and South Korea is a dynamic capitalism. Poland and Spain had the same per capita income in 1950. In 1990, Poland had 42% of Spanish per capita income. And the same result you get when you compare similar pairs of countries. So, socialism, which meant the most extreme elimination of economic freedom, brought about the greatest economic losses in terms of opportunity costs. But more moderate examples of restrictions of economic freedom are harmful too. If you look at the countries which are now in stagnation or in crisis, what is their common feature? Do they have excessively free markets? Do they have excessively small governments? Of course not. Greece, Portugal, and they say Italy, they have the opposite of it. They have huge fiscal states and there are lots of regulations. And there was a systematic research. There are thousands of papers which try to link via econometrics the differences in economic freedom to the differences in longer-term economic growth. The overwhelming majority shows that the more restricted economic freedom, the slower economic growth in the longer run. So we have very strong that restrictions on economic freedom which go beyond certain classical functions of the government are harmful to economic growth. And let me mention a digression. The word liberalism lived in Europe has been largely damaged by negative hostile propaganda. If you are called liberal, it is meant as invective. What is worse than liberal? Neoliberal. It's meant as a worse invective. But look at the directions of reforms in countries which are under crisis or attempted reform. Are they going in the statist direction to solve the problem? No, they are trying to go in the opposite direction. So while the word liberalism has been weakened by negative propaganda, but the practice of policies is in the opposite direction. And it's a great pleasure to watch socialism, which launched liberal reforms. I hope this will happen in France. It's very interesting how are they going to explain this, in what terms. So I said one can show that a large extent of economic freedom is fundamental for people and also indispensable for democracy. And it is against this background which one should be shocked and mobilized that this fundamental important freedom is the most attacked nowadays. And we more or less know why. Let me remind you. I think there are two overlapping influences or groups. You have interest groups who want to maintain or achieve privileges, and then you have massive rent-seeking society where lots of energy is wasted by this. And some of these people engage in interest groups either believe that the state is Santa Claus, and this is a very dangerous belief, okay? Or they assume that they can get net benefit, so they can win more than they lose, that other people would pay. And if everybody believes that, then you have massive rent-seeking, and this is one of the problems. And then you have overlapping with these ideological groups, and I can only refer you to great essays written by Mises, Hayek, Aron, Nozick. They have all shown, especially Nozick, because he has a great sense of humor, a great liberal in the European sense, or libertarian philosopher, surprised from Harvard. You would never suspect that there would be a classical liberal from Harvard, but he was from Harvard. And then you have the statist groups, or you could have this collectivist groups, which engage in deification of the state. And to finish just examples, this sort of nonsense is constantly repeated. And remember, the effect upon other people does not depend on the truth, it depends on the power of the propaganda. So one has to have a stronger one. You can still read books which says free market produce greed. Or socialist could produce a better man. You can still read that market exchange is naturally immoral. And they don't say what is the alternative. Free market is blamed by producing inequality, but they are not saying what inequality and what is ideal inequality. I think the worst a nonsense is being repeated that the market, the modern economy is so complex that it cannot self-regulate. So you need central planning. And it was also, this has various variants. One is failure of some respective markets, individual markets, but there's also Keynesianism. Well, what Keynes basically said, his main message was like that free market economy has a tendency to get stuck in a bad equilibrium. And what is the solution? Enlightened government by special macroeconomic policies is the only force you can bring a free market economy from this bad, what they call equilibrium. Now, first, it is against facts. Because in the 19th century there were crises and there was no Keynesianism, but economy recovered. By the way, 19th century crisis was not as extreme as 20th century. And second, it assumes that in the government you have angels. Ordinary people are ordinary, but in the government you have angels, and these angels have a special power to take the economy out of that equilibrium. And this nonsense is widely believed. And during the crisis, you have a revival of Keynesianism. The the demand for miracles is unlimited, especially during difficult times. I think the most destructive cliché comes from Marx. And many people speak Marx without realizing that they are repeating it. This is the vision of capitalistic society as consisting of two groups, which Marx has named classes. The first were bourgeois, exploiters. And the second group was exploited, employees. Now, people who are infected with this cliché are always skeptical against entrepreneurs, called capitalists, and they tend to support everything which the trade unions do, including legislation which destroys jobs, like excessive job protection, etc. And this has nothing to do with intellect. This is emotions. Because then you have a very similar vision of society and you know what to do. There are bad guys and good guys. You are good, so you oppose bad guys, and you support good guys. Life is simple. Now, well, it's pretty easy to show that these and the other anti-market cliché or myths have their source in the utopian image of human nature, of the state, the lessons of history and what people like Madison have said are often forgotten. And in the flagrant errors in reasoning, if there's reasoning at all. Wishful thinking. That's a great amount, wishful thinking. Simple, and speedy responses. Or people blame free markets for the fallacies on non-free market capitalism. So they confuse, there are different kinds of capitalism. Crony capitalism is different from free market capitalism. And they do not compare. They criticize without showing their alternative. Now, I don't have a simple answer to that. I already suggested that mobilization around some simple principles is the key. The mobilization should never end because attempts to reduce economic freedom would never end. Both interest groups and ideological groups, so there has to be a constant and strong counterweight. But if I had to say something at the end, I would say first, it would be very important to find some institutional devices to try to limit some forms of state expansion, or at least to show the costs. And it is intellectually relatively easy with respect to public finance. Because you can show the public debt, how is it growing? By the way, not only explicit but implicit pension debt. This is, we just recently in Poland, in the center of also have shown the size of implicit debt in Poland to the displeasure of the government. And this should be used. It is more difficult to find intellectual devices which would limit regulation. And this is why regulation is creeping, then you have accumulated negative effects and then deregulation. One idea which I ran across as proposed by American constitutional lawyer Richard Epstein would be to regard regulation as expropriation and try to and demand them indemnity. The second point, absolutely communication and mobilization. It's much easier to say bad ideas regarding economy. It's much easier because they can draw upon simple emotion, anger, wishful thinking, demand for miracles. So one has to be better in communication. And finally, I think one should work all the time to be ready with a good program to be implemented quickly as opportunity arises. An opportunity may be political opening or crisis. So don't get crisis, get wasted, if it happens, unfortunately. So, sorry for speaking so for such a long time, but I hope there's still some time for a discussion.
governatore, ma ha fondato un partito, ha fatto il governatore della banca centrale, il ministro dell'economia e tante altre cose, evidentemente. Prego, I think you accept questions.
Oh, absolutely. And especially disagreement.
You use it.
And suggestions for useful action. Yes.
Ho messo nel suo microfono, grazie.
I have introduced myself before. My name is Rino Martagliano. It seems to me that the history doesn't teach anything to the people, because when we live situations like what we are living in this moment, not only in Italy, but in general in Europe, I think that it's important, in my opinion, not only my opinion, but opinions of Nobel Prize, like Petroni, other 300 economists that put a signature in one, perhaps you know, saying that it's important when in the market doesn't exist money, because we haven't money, that some intervention by the state is necessary, because private people don't have money to spend, to invest in the economy. Going back to history, you listed many economists, very ancient economists, but I want only to underline the doctrine of Keynes, that says that when, and we have the example in 1929, we are living the same situation now, that Roosevelt decided to make a very strong intervention in the market, the state of course, in order to support the economy. And just to finish, today the Federal America is spending $60 billion every month in order to support the economy. So I think that in general what you explained about the capitalism can be accepted in general, but there are particular moments in which the intervention of the state is very important. And I want to finish with another example. In the last war, the economy in Italy was destroyed, and thanks to IRI, Istituto Ricostruzione Industriale, IRI, made investment, that means state, and if after in the 1960 and 70 Italy became the fifth economy in the world, was thanks to this type of policy. So, just two questions. So I arrived at two questions. It seems that you are agree with the Chancellor German policy, Merkel. And another question that is a little outside the company. In 2015, Polish people will be called with referendum in order to approve or not the adoption of euro. Tusk said that in 2015 will be this referendum. What do you think about it? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Perhaps I try...
We take probably questions all
No.
You
Sorry,
prefer
I would just to stress a bit what my colleague said, just for that, so you can give just an answer. I think that one of the main points of the last crisis is connected in a way or another to the rules. So the point is, as you said, the more rules there are, the more crimes are possible. And this is very clear. So it's a philosophical point, that's very clear. But if you think that starting from the Glass-Steagall, I'm sure everybody more or less know about this law, starting from that to which was in 1933, after the 29th crisis, we had a sort of equilibrium in the economy because the banks acted as banks and the financial system acted as a financial system. And after the liberalism, or liberalism in this case in the 80s with Reagan, started with Reagan, but then also Clinton and others, and Europe too followed that, we had practically 4 or 5 times the financial situation what was the GNP of the world. And so we started there our huge problem because we gave to the financial situation, I'm sure I don't want to go very, very far from this, but just to make some kind of statements. Without that, let's say, change. So with the rules, we wouldn't be in a situation like we are in this moment. Today, we have, after 5 years of crisis, Poland is in a very good shape because of the public debt. Because of the public debt, which is very high in our country, we are subject to a huge speculation given by the financial system that is without rules, because nobody established after 2007 rules against the speculation, only speculation in this case. And can we explain to the 3.5 million unemployed that today they are without money in this country, 12 and some percent unemployment here and 40% to the young unemployment. Can we explain that we have the financial guys in London and in New York that returned to their previous situation in economical terms, and we have this kind of unemployment? I mean, there must be a point where the rules can arrive, because otherwise you allow the speculation to kill the weak society, if you want. We are a very weak society because we are in the euro, and we cannot do what my colleague said, that America did, and still doing, 80 billion per month they are spending, and they cannot come back, because if they just talk about coming back, the market goes crazy, and we are paying for everybody.
Thank you, grazie. I think you have enough food.
I start with factual. Now, there is not going to be a referendum in Poland in 2015 on Europe, because it would be too risky. Second, in Poland, in order to join Euro, you would have to change the constitution. Our constitution says that Poland's currency is zloty, and for a while joining Euro is not very popular in Poland, and you can understand why. If you repeat you see these horror stories on TV, they are exaggerated, but people react to exaggeration. So this is one thing. And more fundamental what you said, thanks to IRI and other institutions inherited from Mussolini, Italy was growing after the Second World War. No. Italy was growing after the Second World War, and there were IRI and ENI, but was IRI and ENI the reason for Italy growth? No, there are two different stories, because you can point out to Germany. Germany was growing even faster after the Second World War, and there was no INI and no ENI, etc. So the other forces, which were common to some extent to countries like Germany or Italy, were instrumental. And then you privatize them, and rightly so, because I think state holdings are not very good for the long-term economic growth. So why should they be good before? But the most fundamental for other countries without INI and ERI was growing even faster. Now, there were two gentlemen mentioned crisis. Now, as far as the Great Depression is concerned, the established cliché is that it was huge market failure. In the 1929 and etc. And this is part of the popular culture. There's a lot of research. It shows that the main or deeper reasons were huge errors in public policies. One error which was pointed out was monetary policy, which was too loose in the 20s and then too restrictive, and this has been shown by Milton Friedman and Anna Schwartz. And there's a newer research now, in the last 5-10 years, which points out to the pernicious effects of Hoover, because Hoover, before Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was a great central planner and engineer, and it was instrumental in, he believed that if you pushed up wages, then demand would grow and everybody would be happy. But what he achieved was a destruction of profits and collapse of investment. And this policy was continued by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Under Hoover you have increased protectionism and the trade war. So I would only refer you to the newer research, which has been written, which has been described by two very good books, which are popular but very well researched. One is The Forgotten Man, and another one is Liberal Fascism. It describes what were the intellectual sources of New Deal policies and what were the effects. Okay, on the present crisis, the second gentleman has mentioned speculation, etc., etc. Now, first facts. I think countries in the European Union which have suffered problems can be grouped into three categories. First, those who have fiscal boom, they were spending too much at the cost of accumulation of the public debt. And this is Greece and Portugal.
Italy
And
too.
then,
Italy too.
well, Italy deserves a special place. Second, so I call it fiscal financial problem, crisis, because you start with fiscal, but if you borrow, who buys government bonds? The banks. And Greek banks were buying Greek government bonds. Why? One of the reasons was pathological regulation, which is still in force. According to international regulation, which is still valid, the banks in a given country which buy government bonds of this country do not engage capital. Regulations say this is not risky. Of course, it is a complete nonsense, but it's still on the books. So you have this fiscal financial crisis, and when government has a problem, banks have a problem too. Second is financial fiscal. You have a credit boom, like in the United States or in Ireland, in Spain, in Britain too. So the credit is going too fast. It is a mortgage credit. You have a boom in the past. Most people believe this is a pure market failure. And it's not true according to my research. At the bottom of these credit bonds, you have again some wrong policies. Fed in the US has had interest rates at a very low level for a long time, and then credit was growing very crazy. In the United States, you have two politicized institutions, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They contributed to the boom. You have too big to fail phenomenon. So big banks could expect they were going to bail out, so markets offered them cheap credit. So they are getting even bigger. By the way, after this crisis, big institutions turn out to be even bigger. So you can point out that there were some bad policies, plus mistakes done by some governments, of course. By the way, I was a member of the La Rosière group. There was a group of experts in the European Union, and we have published the report. And we can point out the errors in public policies, which contributed to the. And the third group of countries which have suffered problems are those who had high public debt to GDP initially, and very slow growth, even all, because most, I think, of excessive regulations, etc. And this is Italy. But your fiscal situation, of course, is much better than the Greece or Portugal, because you have primary surplus. So you are not in danger. I don't know whether it's good or bad, because dangers are warnings and fertilization. Okay. Perhaps if I have omitted some of difficult questions, I can come to them.
Abbiamo ancora una domanda poi, prima dell'aperitivo.
Yes.
Bencini, prendi il microfono. Sei alto.
The question inspired by the previous people were talking about. That is, it seems to me that the first enemy of the market is market participants themselves, people, not the state. That is, it seems that in moment of crisis, the market forces appear an enemy, not a resource, and so there is a demand for state intervention. As you may have understood, I have a question relating to what we were saying before the beginning of your speech. That is the case of Poland. As Angelo told, in our perception, Poland has been a successful story of liberalism, market, and growth. And we were discussing previously about the story of the Polish pension funds. That is, the state is increasingly becoming anti-capitalist and with a tendency of politicians to go in another direction. So my question is how, even in a story, even in a story of success, you have the forces going against the market. So this is my question.
Okay, on the second, one of the biggest challenges is to anchor good changes. So you do something useful, economy is growing, you have some good institutions. And how to anchor these institutions, so how to win against the attacks. If you look at the history of all Western countries, you have history of crisis, then positive changes, but these positive changes are often undermined. Why? Because they are not anchored. And how to anchor these positive changes, probably you need, as I said, a very vigilant liberal groups in the society. Because it may well be like that. After the crisis, there was some positive institutional change, fiscal discipline, and economy responded. So economy